Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. My husband said the house was his. The promissory note said he owed me $218,000 for it. He signed it himself. Stay close, because sometimes the document that proves your position isn't something a lawyer drafted. Sometimes it's something he wrote himself to make things look simpler, and instead made them true. There is a particular irony in being undone by your own paperwork. The document you created to protect yourself becomes the one that describes exactly what you owe. Paul Garfield was a careful man with money. He kept records. He structured things. He was, in his own estimation, too smart for this. But the promissory note was in his handwriting, and the signature was his, and the beneficiary was his wife. And the law does not make exceptions for people who thought they were being clever. This is a story about a document that sat in a red accordion file in a hall closet for 12 years and then did exactly what it said it would do. Tara Garfield is 46 years old, a high school English teacher in Kansas City, Missouri. She has taught 11th grade English at the same school for 14 years. In the specific patient way of teachers who have decided that the work is the work, and that showing up for it with the same quality of attention each day is both the discipline and the reward. She teaches literature, the kind that has been around long enough to have earned its place. The kind her students sometimes resist and sometimes love, often in the same semester. She is, by professional habit, a careful reader of sentences. She attends to word choice. She notices when a sentence says more than it seems to say. She had not applied this professional attention to the promissory note her husband drafted on their kitchen table 12 years ago. She had watched him write it, sign it, and press the notary stamp against the bottom right corner. She had signed as witness. She had filed it in the red accordion file in the hall closet in the house section, between the insurance policy and the warranty documents for the kitchen appliances, and she had not looked at it again. She had trusted Paul with the money because Paul was the person in the marriage who spoke the language of money. Not that she was ignorant of financial matters, she was not. She managed her own accounts and understood her salary and her retirement contributions and her expenses with competence and clarity. But Paul was a commercial mortgage broker. He moved through the grammar of debt and structure and documentation the way she moved through the grammar of subordinate clauses and narrative voice. It was simply his native register. When he said just for clarity, she had believed that the clarity was for her benefit and that the document was a form of thoughtfulness. She had filed it without examining it carefully. She had trusted the gesture. The marriage was not always bad. This is something Tara has said when the story is told, and she means it with the specificity of someone who has sorted the bad from the good and reached a measured conclusion. Paul was not cruel. He was not unfaithful, as far as she knew. He was exclusionary, financially, strategically, in the specific way of people who have decided that certain domains belong to them, and that the consent of the people affected by those domains is not required. He made financial decisions without consulting her. He described these decisions afterward with the patient explanation of someone tutoring a student, she thought about this analogy often, in the later years, offering her the conclusion without the deliberation. She had accepted this for a long time, because the decisions were usually financially sound, and because she had other things to do, and because she had believed the marriage would last. It did not last. The warning signs arrived in the particular form that certain warnings take. Not dramatic, not sudden, but structural. She noticed the way Paul began to talk about money differently in the final year, with a specificity about what was his and what was theirs that had not previously been present. He asked, at one point, whether she had her own account set up, a question she found odd until she understood it was not about her welfare. He began working from home more, with the study door closed and calls she was not invited to hear. And then his sister's husband said something at a family dinner about the new LLC Paul was setting up for his brokerage practice, and Tara filed that information in the part of her mind that was beginning to accumulate a picture. The picture became clear the morning Paul's financial disclosure arrived through his attorney's office, a formal document, part of the divorce process he had initiated. That listed the family assets and their characterization. The marital home was listed at $940,000, its full current appraised value, as a jointly held marital asset. The mortgage balance was listed $312,000. The promissory note was not mentioned. It was not on the list. Tara read the disclosure at the kitchen table, in the kitchen of the house she had helped finance with her grandmother's inheritance. She read it twice. Then she went to the hall closet, pulled out the red accordion file, opened the house section, and found the note. It was one page, handwritten at the top in Paul's precise block print, the date, 12 years ago. Below, typed, he had typed the body on their old desktop and printed it, then written the date and the property address by hand in the blanks. I, Paul Michael Garfield, acknowledge receipt of $218,000 from Tara Lynn Garfield, Warren, to be repaid in full upon sale of or upon dissolution of our marriage, whichever occurs first. The interest clause, one sentence at the prime rate as of the date of repayment. His signature, in blue ink. His notary stamp pressed firmly enough that the embossed seal was crisp on the paper. And her signature, as witness, in her own handwriting from 12 years ago, the handwriting she recognized as the version of herself that had been 20 years younger and had not known what she was witnessing, except that it was, Paul said, just paperwork. She called Harriet Cole from the kitchen table, with a note in her hand at 8:15 in the morning. Harriet Cole is 47 years old, a family law and asset recovery attorney based in Kansas City, who has been in practice for 20 years, and who has, in those 20 years, developed the particular quality of certain excellent attorneys, the ability to receive surprising information without performing surprise. When Tara read the note to her over the phone, Harriet listened to the end without speaking. Then she said, "He notarized it himself?" Tara said, "He's a licensed notary." Harriet said, "Come in this afternoon. Bring the original." Tara brought the original. Harriet read it in its physical form, not from Tara's recitation, but from the document itself, in Paul's handwriting with his notary seal. She held it up to the light. She looked at the embossed seal. She read the repayment trigger. She read the interest clause. She set the note down on the conference table with the deliberateness of someone who has just decided what the next 12 weeks of a case look like. She said, "This is a valid promissory note under Missouri law." Paul drafted a negotiable instrument, notarized it with his own seal, and filed it in a place where his wife would find it. The dissolution trigger has occurred. The note is due. She looked at Tara. "Do you want me to tell you what the accrued interest calculates to?" Tara said, "Yes." Harriet said, "Give me a moment." The calculation took 4 minutes, with a table of prime rate histories open on her screen. The principal was $218,000. The interest, at prime over 12 years with the applicable rate changes, accrued to $64,400. The total obligation, $282,400. Paul owed Tara $282,400 before any equitable division of the remaining home equity began. After mortgage payoff of $312,000, the remaining home equity from the $940,000 appraised value was $628,000. From that $628,000, Tara was owed the note obligation of $282,400 first, leaving $345,600 for equitable division between the parties. Her total from the home, $282,400 plus half of $345,600, which was $172,800, for a total of $427,000 from a house Paul had claimed was simply a marital asset to be divided in half. Half would have been $314,000. The note changed that by $113,000. Tara sat with the calculation for a moment. She said, "He filed it in our closet." Harriet said, "He did." Tara said, "He told me it was just paperwork." Harriet said, "It is paperwork. That's the point." Paul's reaction, when his attorney conveyed the existence and content of the note, was the specific reaction of a man who has been outmaneuvered by his own thoroughness. He went quiet. Then he said, through his attorney, that the note was a personal arrangement and not a legal obligation. His attorney dutifully transmitted this position to Harriet, who responded in writing with the Missouri Uniform Commercial Code provisions governing negotiable instruments. A written, signed promise to pay a specific amount of money on a specified event, notarized and witnessed, constitutes a valid promissory note regardless of the intent with which it was created. Paul had not drafted the note intending it to be legally enforceable, or rather, he had drafted it as a formality, a piece of paper that would satisfy Tara's sense that her money was acknowledged without obligating him to anything he expected to pay. He had not anticipated the dissolution trigger, or rather, and this is the element of the story that Harriet finds most striking, he had included the dissolution trigger himself in his own handwriting, in the typed body of the note. He had written the trigger that would be used against him. He called Tara directly. This was, she later told Harriet, the only conversation in the divorce proceedings where he dropped the professional remove he had maintained and spoke to her as himself. He said, "That was a personal arrangement." She said, "You notarized it." He said, "Tara, this is not how this is going to go." She said, "I think it is." She put the note back in the red accordion file. She took the file to Harriet's office the next morning. She did not speak to him again about the note. Harriet handled all subsequent communication. Let me tell you about the procedural period, because Paul was not the kind of man who concedes without a full exploration of the alternatives, and he had a professional fluency in financial instruments that made him a more sophisticated opponent than most. Paul's attorney argued, in the response to Harriet's motion, that the note had never been intended as a legal instrument. It was an informal family document created to acknowledge a family loan, not to create a legally enforceable obligation. This is an argument that has some surface logic. People create informal documents all the time with no intention of legal enforceability. The problem, as Harriet's response noted, is that Paul's document met every statutory requirement for a valid promissory note without exception. He had used the word acknowledge receipt. He had specified the exact dollar amount. He had included a repayment trigger. He had included an interest rate mechanism. He had signed it, dated it, and notarized it with his own licensed notary seal. Paul's attorney then argued that Paul, as the drafter, could not be held to the legal consequences of a document he created without independent legal counsel, that the note should be interpreted in light of the drafting party's intent rather than its technical legal effect. Harriet's response was efficient. Paul was a licensed commercial mortgage broker who routinely drafted and reviewed promissory notes for professional clients. He was not a layperson who had inadvertently created a legal instrument without understanding the form. He was a professional in the specific field of debt documentation who had created a document that matched the statutory definition of a promissory note with precision. Paul's attorney did not reply to that argument in writing. He requested an in-person discussion. Harriet agreed to a brief call. The call lasted 12 minutes and resulted in a request for a financial examiner to trace the source of the $218,000 down payment, a request intended, Harriet believed, to complicate the provenance question in hopes of muddying the note's basis. She agreed to the request because she was confident the trace would confirm what Tara had said. NVIDIA, the appointed financial examiner, was thorough and fast. He reviewed 9 days of bank records, inheritance distribution documents, and account transfer records, and confirmed in a clean report that $218,000 had been transferred from Tara's inheritance account, funded by the estate of her maternal grandmother, to the closing account for the home purchase in the week before the closing date, 12 years ago. The trace was clean. The source was Tara's inheritance. The down payment was exactly what the note described. Paul's attorney reviewed the trace report. He did not respond substantively. He requested a settlement conference. The settlement hearing was held on a gray January morning in Kansas City. Present, Paul's attorney, Harriet, Tara, and the mediator the court had assigned to facilitate. The room was a conference room in a law building near the courthouse, neutral, beige, equipped with a whiteboard nobody used. The coffee was bad. These details matter only in the sense that the setting was deliberately unremarkable, and the document was not. Paul's attorney made the opening offer, split the home equity 50-50, and forgive the note as a family accommodation that predated the formal divorce process. The offer was presented with the confidence of someone who has calculated that the other side might prefer certainty to continued litigation. Harriet acknowledged the offer. Then she placed the exhibit binder on the conference table and opened it to the first page, the promissory note, the original, in Paul's handwriting, with his notary stamp. Behind it, the NVIDIA trace report. Behind that, the inheritance documentation for Tara's grandmother's estate. Behind that, Paul's notary license records, confirming his professional standing. She said, the note was created, notarized, and witnessed by Mr. Garfield. It describes a specific obligation with a specific trigger. The trigger has occurred. We are asking for the note to be honored in full. Paul looked at the note. He had not seen it since he filed it. He looked at his own handwriting, at the typed body and the handwritten date and address, at the interest clause he had written himself, at his signature and his notary stamp. He looked at it for longer than you would look at a document if you were looking at it for the first time. He looked at it like someone who is looking at a decision he made 12 years ago and is only now fully understanding what he decided. He looked at the mediator. The mediator looked at Harriet. Harriet was looking at the note, as she had been looking at it throughout, not at Paul, not performing patience, simply reading the document. Paul said quietly to his attorney, "Request a recess." His attorney said, "We'll take a recess." Harriet said she was available until 5. The recess lasted 45 minutes. Paul's attorney emerged and said they would honor the note. The settlement was finalized in 3 weeks. The home was listed and sold in March. At closing, from the net proceeds after mortgage payoff, $282,400 was paid to Tara per the promissory note, principal and accrued interest, before any equity distribution occurred. The remaining equity was divided equally. Tara received a total of $427,000 from the house her grandmother's inheritance had helped purchase. She bought a smaller house in Brookside in the spring, a neighborhood she had wanted to live in for years, with older houses and good trees and the specific quality of established Kansas City neighborhoods that have been lived in long enough to have an atmosphere. The house was in her name. She paid the down payment from her own account. She did not draft a promissory note for it. She kept the accordion file. She moved it from the old house to the new one in the last load of boxes. She put it in the front hall closet of the Brookside house, in the same position it had always occupied, front left, accessible without moving anything else. She has not yet decided what to do with the original note. She might frame it. She is not entirely serious about this, but she is also not entirely joking. Let me tell you something about what Tara understands now about the note that she did not understand when she filed it. She is an English teacher. She teaches sentences. She has spent 14 years explaining to students that the meaning of a sentence is not a fixed thing. That word, choice, and syntax and the specific grammar of a construction all participate in meaning, that a sentence can say more than it appears to say when read with attention. She teaches close reading. She teaches her students to slow down, to notice the verb tenses and the qualifications and the specific nouns that anchor a claim in something concrete. She did not apply any of this to the note when Paul handed it to her. She has thought about why, and the answer is not that she was naive or that she trusted without reason. The answer is that Paul was the person in the marriage who managed financial documents, and when a financial document was presented to her in the context of a household decision he was managing, she filed it in the appropriate place and did not apply the attention she would have applied to a student essay. The professional attention she brought to language in the classroom stopped at the door of the financial domain, which belonged to Paul. She knows this now. She did not know it then. What she knows, having now read the note with the full attention of both an English teacher and a person with a personal stake in every sentence of it, is that Paul wrote it precisely. Not accidentally precisely, deliberately. He was a professional in debt documentation. He knew what a promissory note required. He included all of it, the acknowledgement of receipt, the specific amount, the trigger, the interest mechanism, the notarial seal. He created a document that was, technically and legally and deliberately, a valid promissory note, and he told Tara it was just paperwork, and she filed it in the closet, and it sat there for 12 years being exactly what he had made it. She has tried to understand why he included the dissolution trigger. She does not believe he intended it as a gift. She believes he included it because the dissolution trigger was the standard repayment clause for a marital loan of this kind, and he was a professional who drafted documents correctly. And drafting the clause correctly was automatic for him, in a way that comprehending its future implications was not. He wrote the trigger without thinking about the trigger. He notarized the note without thinking about the notary seal as evidence. He filed it in the hall closet without thinking about what it meant that his wife could find it. He was careful. His carefulness was directed at the form of the document, not at its future effects. He was meticulous about making the note look correct and not meticulous about understanding what correct would eventually mean. She finds a kind of professional justice in this, not vindictive, just the justice of the thing itself. A commercial mortgage broker who drafts promissory notes for clients, who understands the legal requirements of negotiable instruments, who knows that the signature and the notary seal and the specific clause language are what gives a document its enforceability. That person drafted a document that was enforceable, because that is how he drafts documents. He could not draft a sloppy promissory note. It was not in him. His professionalism is what made it valid. Tara has thought about this in the specific way that English teachers think about irony, structurally, as a feature of the text. The note was written by the person it obligates, drafted with professional precision, filed in a location accessible to the note holder, and held for 12 years until the trigger he wrote into it occurred. The author of the document and the subject of the document are the same person. The form he provided protection for the other party. The irony is not accidental. It is the natural consequence of a careful man applying his carefulness to a document without fully reading it the way the other party would eventually read it. She did read it, in the end. Slowly, with full attention, at the kitchen table, holding it with both hands. She read every word he had chosen. She understood every clause. And she called Harriet. Paul thought he was being careful. He was. The note was meticulously drafted, correctly notarized, and filed exactly where his wife could find it. Sometimes the most careful person in the room is the one who protects someone else. If you have ever signed a promissory note, or had someone draft one for you, read it the way you would read any contract. Read the trigger. Read the interest clause. Read the repayment conditions. Because those sentences, written in someone else's careful hand, describe exactly what is owed and when. The law will read them the same way. Thank you for listening today. Leave me your city in the comments. I love knowing where these stories reach. Share this with someone who should hear it. And if it stayed with you, please like this episode. I'll see you next time. Let me go back to the beginning of Tara and Paul, to the years before the note, before the house, before the dissolution, because the character of their marriage shapes the character of everything that happened in the hall closet. Tara had met Paul at a professional development conference for the Kansas City area business community that she had attended, somewhat against her instincts, because a colleague had asked her to come as company. She was 27. Paul was 31. He was presenting a session on commercial loan structuring, which was not her field and did not immediately concern her, but he spoke with the kind of precision about his subject that she recognized, in the way that people who are excellent at one language recognize fluency in other languages, as genuine expertise rather than performed authority. She had introduced herself afterward, and they had coffee, and 3 months later they were spending most of their time in the same places. She has described Paul, in the years since, as someone she found genuinely interesting for a long time. He was intelligent in the specific way of people who think structurally, who see systems and their components, who trace the logic of a financial arrangement the way she traced the logic of a narrative argument. They talked in the early years about their respective fields with the curiosity of people who are actually interested in each other's thinking, and she learned things about debt and lending and the architecture of financial instruments that she found. To her mild surprise, genuinely fascinating, he learned things about literature and language that he found, she believed, less fascinating but more useful than he expected. He became, over years of conversation with her, a more careful sentence writer than he had been. She became, over years of conversation with him, a more structurally aware reader of documents. The latter skill took 19 years to apply to the promissory note. "Better late than never," Harriet said, when Tara shared this observation. Tara said, 12 years is a long time for a document to wait. The house was purchased in a year when Kansas City's real estate market had moved significantly from the period of their early marriage, when they had rented in the Waldo neighborhood and talked about buying someday and seemed to have time. The someday converged with her grandmother's estate, which settled the year before they found the house. And with Paul's identification of a property in the Brookside adjacent area that he believed was undervalued by about 20%. He ran the numbers. He liked the numbers. He came to Tara with the proposal. Her inheritance would cover the down payment. He would cover the mortgage from his income, and the house would be theirs. He said the note was just to formalize the arrangement, that she shouldn't worry about it, that it was the way you did these things when you wanted to be precise. She had believed him about the precision. She had believed that the precision was in service of her interests. She had not understood that precision, in the wrong hands, can be in service of the drafting party's interests in ways the other party does not immediately perceive. What she understands now, and what she wishes she had understood then, is that a document drafted by one party in a transaction, even a family transaction, even a loving transaction, even a transaction between people who are intending to build something together, deserves the same attention from the non-drafting party as any other contract. The love does not change the legal effect. The familiarity does not change what the clauses say. The trust does not change the enforceability. Paul was her husband, and she trusted him. And the note was still a promissory note, and was still enforceable. And the enforcement favored her, because the note said what it said, and she was the note holder it named. She has told this to students. Not the personal version. Her professional life and her private life do not overlap in the way that would make that appropriate, but the structural version, in the context of financial literacy discussions that come up in the English curriculum when students are reading work that involves contracts, debts, legal obligations. She says, documents mean what they say. A sentence is a commitment. Read it before you sign it, and if someone else wrote it, read it before you file it. The same attention you bring to understanding a difficult novel, the patience, the close reading, the willingness to sit with a sentence until it opens up, that attention belongs to any document that has your name on it. She is a good teacher. Her students are 17. They are at the age when abstract principles become real, because you are old enough to have made a few commitments and young enough to remember the surprise of discovering what commitment actually requires. She watches them hear this lesson the way she wishes she had heard it at 17, when she was still young enough for the lesson to have worked on her before the trust that makes the lesson seem unnecessary. She is also aware, when she gives this lesson, that she did not come by it cleanly. She learned it from a note in a red accordion file that she had not opened for 12 years, and from an attorney who read it with the cool precision it deserved, and from a settlement conference where the person who had drafted the note requested a recess because he recognized his own handwriting doing something he had not anticipated. She learned it the way you learn most things that matter, not from a principle delivered at the right time, but from a situation that required you to apply the principle before you had fully articulated it. The note is in the accordion file in the new house. Someday, she will decide what to do with it. For now, it is simply there, in the front hall closet where it lives, available in 30 seconds if she needs it. She does not think she will need it again. But she has learned not to make assumptions about what she will need. Let me tell you about Cynthia Garfield, Paul's mother, because she appears in this story in a way that Tara has not fully processed and that deserves to be named. Cynthia is 73 years old and lives in the Kansas City suburb where Paul grew up, in a house she has occupied for 40 years. She has the specific character of certain women of her generation who experienced financial dependence as a form of safety rather than a form of limitation, and who view any woman who finds herself in a divorce proceeding as having failed the project of marriage in a way that reflects on her character. She did not say this to Tara directly. She was not a cruel person in the direct sense. She expressed it through the particular warmth she withdrew from Tara during the divorce process, the way she began speaking about her son's situation in terms that assigned the difficulty to Tara's intransigence rather than to Paul's financial management of the household. She called Tara twice during the proceedings. Both times, she said, with the gentle certainty of someone who has decided in advance that she is offering wisdom rather than pressure. Tara, marriages end and begin again, but the way you handle the ending is what people remember. Tara thanked her and ended both calls without addressing the substance. Harriet had told her to limit her direct communications with Paul's family. She had been following that instruction already, by instinct. What Tara found herself thinking about during those conversations and after was the specific category of woman Cynthia represented, the woman who had been the financial dependent in her own marriage and who had experienced the protection that dependence conferred, a husband who handled things. The assurance of provision as entirely preferable to the risk and complexity of financial agency. For Cynthia, the promissory note arrangement would have seemed natural. The husband organizes the money. The wife trusts the husband's organization. The paperwork is handled. She would not have understood why Tara was pursuing the note. She would not have understood the note as an asset. She would have understood it as paperwork that a wife was using adversarially against her husband, which was, in Cynthia's view, a failure of the role. Tara has not been angry at Cynthia for this view. She finds it sad, in the specific way that views born of limited options are sad. They are sincere expressions of what a person learned to need from a world that offered fewer choices than the current one. She does not want Cynthia's experience. She has her own, which includes a promissory note and an English teacher's habit of reading sentences carefully, and which has produced, in the end, a house in Brookside in her own name, and a financial position she can manage without anyone's guidance. She does not talk to Cynthia anymore. This was not a dramatic decision. It was simply the outcome of the divorce and its aftermath, the natural dissolution of a relationship whose continuity had depended on a marriage that had ended. She is at peace with this. She did not choose the dissolution. She chose the note. The Brookside house has a front porch, which was a requirement Tara had identified before she began looking. She had always wanted a porch, the kind with a swing or chairs, the kind where you can sit on a Saturday morning with coffee and watch the neighborhood exist. The house she found has a covered front porch with 2 deep rattan chairs and a small table. And in the spring and fall, when the Kansas City weather permits, she sits there on weekend mornings with a book and coffee and sometimes nothing, just the awareness of being in a space that is hers, entirely, with no note required. She has thought about the house in those quiet morning moments in a way she has not articulated to anyone, including Harriet or her sister or the colleagues she is friendly with at school. She thinks, the house was bought with money that came through my grandmother, through my mother, through the women in my family who accumulated what they could and passed it forward. The note was the document that protected that money's trace in the house, Paul had claimed. The house Harriet recovered for her through the note was, in some small way, still connected to the line of women who had accumulated it in the first place. She does not say this because it sounds, when she rehearses it in her head, more like poetry than like the plain speech she prefers. But she thinks it. Her grandmother would have understood the note immediately. She had been a practical woman with a practical relationship to money, had kept records, had understood documents, had told Tara once in a kitchen conversation many years ago, always know what the paper says, because the paper is what they read when the talking is over. The talking was over. The paper said what Paul had written. Harriet read it to the court. The court agreed. Let me tell you about the recess. 45 minutes is a specific amount of time, not brief enough to be perfunctory, not long enough to suggest that the outcome was actually in doubt. 45 minutes is the amount of time it takes to fully absorb information you have been resisting absorbing, and to arrive at the pragmatic conclusion that the resistance is no longer useful. Tara was in the conference room during the recess with Harriet. She had expected, at some level, that the recess would lead to an attempt at a revised compromise offer. Something higher than the original 50-50 proposal, but still below full note satisfaction. She had told Harriet she was prepared to hold to the full amount. Harriet had said, "Good." Then they had sat, with the exhibit binder on the table between them and the bad coffee in the styrofoam cups, and the mediator gone to the room down the hall. And Harriet had worked on her email, and Tara had looked at the note. She had looked at it a number of times during the proceedings, more times than was strictly necessary, more times than the document required. She had looked at it the way you look at something you have been carrying for a long time without knowing you were carrying it. The note had been in the red accordion file for 12 years. She had not thought about it. She had not known, while she was filing it in the correct location and going about the business of the marriage and the teaching and the ordinary texture of a life, that she was also, in a legal sense, a note holder. She had not thought of herself that way. She is thinking of herself that way now. When Paul's attorney came back into the conference room and said they would honor the note, Tara did not feel surprise. She felt the specific settlement of a thing that has been uncertain for long enough to become its own category of waiting. The waiting that has almost become normal, resolving suddenly into a fact. The note was going to be honored. The $282,400 was going to be paid. The house was going to be sold, and the proceeds were going to be distributed in the way the note required, before any equitable division. Because the note said so, and Paul had written the note, and Paul's attorney had now confirmed that Paul understood this. She said thank you to the mediator. She said thank you to Harriet. She picked up her copy of the exhibit binder, which contained her copy of the original note, and she walked to the elevator and pressed the ground floor button and rode down in the ordinary way of elevator rides, which have no awareness of significance. She drove home. She made lunch. She called her sister in the afternoon and reported the outcome. Her sister said, $427,000? Tara said, yes. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Grandma's money. Tara said, Grandma's money came back. Her sister said, and then some. Tara said, and then some. She has thought about that conversation in the months since. The $64,400 in accrued interest is, in a sense, the note's argument for its own legal seriousness. Paul had included the prime rate interest clause, which means the note had been building toward the accrued interest for 12 years. The interest is the reward for the note's patience. The note had been correct the whole time. It had simply been waiting in a hall closet for the dissolution trigger that Paul had written into it himself. In the year he bought the house, at a kitchen table she can still picture clearly. She pictures it sometimes. The kitchen of the old house, with the light coming in from the window on the western wall that she had never loved as much as she loved the Brookside porch. Paul at the table with the printed body of the note and his pen, filling in the date and the property address in the blanks he had left. His careful block print, the same print she had seen for 19 years on grocery lists and appointment reminders and financial summaries. His notary stamp, which he carried in a small leather case that lived in the home office, the press of the stamp against the paper, the embossed seal. He had done it correctly. Of course he had. She is sitting on the Brookside porch on a Saturday morning in October as I tell this story, or she is in the kitchen grading papers, or she is at school in the classroom where she has taught for 14 years doing the work of the day. She is not looking at the note. She does not need to look at it. She knows it is in the accordion file in the front hall closet, correctly filed in its place. Available in 30 seconds. It did what it was supposed to do. It rested in the closet, and it waited, and it described, with the patient precision of a well-drafted document, exactly what was owed and when. The teacher read it. The attorney presented it. The court agreed with it. The check arrived. Paul was careful. His carefulness is the thing that made this possible. The next time someone drafts a document for your signature and tells you it's just paperwork, dear listeners, read it like a teacher reads a sentence. Read every word. Read the trigger. Read the interest clause. Read the repayment conditions. Read it like the document that matters. Because it is. There is a moment in the teaching life that Tara returns to when she thinks about the promissory note and what it taught her. Not about her marriage, but about reading. It was a classroom moment from 3 years ago, the year before the divorce process began. She was teaching The Great Gatsby, as she teaches it most years, because it is on the curriculum and because it rewards close reading in ways that accumulate with each pass. She was discussing with her class the chapter in which Gatsby arranges the meeting with Daisy through Nick, and she asked the students to look closely at a single sentence describing the scene, not the famous sentences, not the ones everyone remembers, but a quiet interior sentence in which Nick observes Gatsby from a distance and describes something in his posture that the students had initially skimmed past. She said, "Don't read past it. Read it again. What does the sentence say about what this person is feeling that he is not saying aloud?" A student in the back row, a girl named Maricela, who was not her strongest student in terms of analytical writing, but who was one of her most attentive listeners, raised her hand and said, "He already knows how this ends." The sentence says he already knows, but he's going to do it anyway. Tara had looked at her. She had said, "Yes." Exactly, the sentence says something the character won't say. That's how you know it's true. She thinks about that now when she thinks about the promissory note. The note says something Paul did not say, that this money was hers, that the dissolution was a real possibility he had considered enough to name, that the repayment was a real obligation he had documented enough to notarize. He did not say these things in the kitchen when he handed her the note. He said it was just paperwork. The note said something different. The note said, "I acknowledge what I owe you, and here is the moment when it comes due." He already knew, or some part of him, the careful professional part that drafts documents correctly, knew, and he wrote it down anyway, in the specific clear language of a negotiable instrument, and filed it in the hall closet where she would eventually open the accordion file and read it the way she had taught students to read, slowly, with attention. Without skimming past the clause that says more than it seems to say. She taught Marcella the lesson. Marcella taught her the application. The note had been waiting to be read correctly for 12 years. She finds this funny in the private way she finds certain things funny, not laughable, but quietly ironic in a way that she can carry as a small warmth rather than a wound. She is an English teacher. She reads sentences for a living. She spent 12 years not reading a sentence in a file in her own closet. And then she read it, finally, with both hands flat on the table. With the full attention she brings to a student's essay or a novel's difficult passage, and the sentence gave up everything it had been holding. That is what sentences do, when you read them correctly. The Brookside house has a garden in the back that the previous owners maintained with more skill than Tara has, but she is learning. She has a raised bed she put in herself in May, in which she is growing tomatoes and basil and a variety of herbs she cannot always identify correctly. The garden is a project she is engaged in for the first time in her adult life. She had not gardened before, had not had the space or the time or the particular readiness for something that grows slowly and requires sustained attention across seasons. She likes it. She likes the sustained attention part especially. She is good at sustained attention. It is the quality that makes her an effective teacher of literature, and it is, she has found, equally effective in the service of a raised bed in a backyard in Brookside. She gardens on Saturday mornings sometimes, when the porch morning is over, and the coffee is finished, and the book has reached a natural stopping place. She digs in weeds and checks the tomatoes and ties the climbing stems to the support stakes with the patient attention of someone who has learned that the work is the work and that showing up for it with the same quality of care each day is both the discipline and the reward. She thinks, this is not so different from teaching, or from reading, or from keeping a document in the correct place for 12 years until it is needed. Everything that matters requires patience and sustained attention. The documents, the sentences, the plants, the cases, the self. She is learning this. She is not finished learning it. But she is in a house in her own name, with a garden in the back and a porch in the front and an accordion file in the hall closet. And the spring tomatoes came in well, and the October light in Brookside is the best light she has lived in. That is enough. It is, in fact, more than enough. One more thing, and then this story closes. Neil Osei called Harriet in the final days of the home sale closing with a question about the trace. He had found a second transfer from Tara's inheritance account, a wire of $41,000 4 months after the home purchase, to an account he could not immediately identify. He wanted to flag it before the file was closed. Harriet told Tara. Tara said, "I don't remember that." She thought about it for 2 days, went through her memory of the year after the home purchase, the months of the inheritance distribution, the financial movements of that period. She had no memory of authorizing a $41,000 transfer to any account she did not recognize. She called Harriet and said, "I need to know where that went." Neil spent another week on the trace. He followed the $41,000 through 2 account transfers and found it in an account held under a name she did not immediately recognize. A business account in the name of a consulting entity that Paul had established early in their marriage. The transfer had been made while she was the authorized account holder on the inheritance account. In the weeks before the account was closed after distribution was complete, she had not authorized it. The signature on the wire transfer instruction was hers, or appeared to be hers. Harriet presented this to Paul's attorney as a new matter, separate from the divorce settlement, for investigation. Paul's attorney said he would review. The review has not yet concluded as of the time this story was told. Tara has set this aside. She has set it aside carefully, the way she sets aside difficult passages in novels she is preparing to teach, not ignoring them, but marking them for return, for the sustained attention they require when she is ready to give it. She has enough right now. She has the house and the garden and the porch and the accordion file and the October light. The $41,000 question is in Harriet's hands, which is the right place for it. She will know what it means when she needs to know. The documents will say so. What she already knows she will keep. She keeps the note. She keeps the file. She reads carefully. That is the whole of the lesson, and it is the whole of her story. She lives on the porch, in the light, in Brookside, and the document that describes what she is owed is exactly where it needs to be.